Yes.
Okay, that's really cool. Okay, well I'm gonna get going here so we can use our time. Uh, as you know, I like to move around the church, so it's kind of my style. So if we're gonna talk about the altar, I'd like to place or the Eucharist, which is of course right here. Then I'd like to talk about the context of the sanctuary where I'm standing vis-a-vis the rest of the architecture of the church. Okay? So this is the fun stuff for me. So I'm just going to have fun and talk about things that I like, and y'all can pick up whatever you want along the way, and then next week Win can fix it all. All right? I've already told him that. So then right here I have an altar rail, right? So we have this altar rail. So we're going to talk about that altar rail, and we'll talk about the kind of history. So does anybody know what out there where y'all sit, the congregation sits when you're not in the choir? What is that called?
Isn't it the nave?
That's right. So it's the nave. So if you want to, you think I'm a naval officer, right? So if you want to think about the heart of the ship, that's the heart of the ship. If you want to be reminded of the naval reference, you just have to look up and you can see the hull of the ship inverted, which is really fun because most places, even ancient cathedrals that are made of stone, they have wood roofs. Now, they wouldn't float if you flipped them over. Most of them wouldn't. But you can kind of think of it as an inverted arc, right? That's kind of fun. The narthex, it would be the back of the church across. We actually have a bell tower that serves as our narthex, but many churches have a division at the back of the nave and another door where the people would gather, and that would be called the narthex. And then, of course, we have a bell tower entrance here, which doesn't have... you can go into many cathedrals throughout Europe. You won't necessarily find a bell tower entrance. You would find probably a straight entrance into a narthex, and then from the narthex into the nave. And from the nave into, what's the area where the choir sits? Any guesses?
I mean, I always just call it the choir stalls.
Okay, good. Well, you're close, and thanks for trying. All right, because you could call it the choir. In some places, they would call it the choir, or they would call it the chancel. This is the chancel area. And then from the chancel, we come into the sanctuary. So it is not patterned after after the Jewish temple. But if you want to pick up your study Bible and study the Jewish temple, in the Jewish temple, you went from more public to more private spaces until you got into the central worship space, which was called the Holy of Holies. And into that Holy of Holies, one of the priests was elected. If you want to read the story in Luke about the birth of John the Baptist, Zechariah was elected to go in as that high priest to offer sacrifices for the people. That was once a year. And the space was so holy that only one person could go in there. And that was an elected priest, not just any priest, but you had to be elected amongst the priests to go in there. And they tied a rope around that person's leg in case they passed out while they were in there, because of course the other people couldn't go in, so they would just drag them out if anything happened. That was their form of CPR. Haul them out of there. Just get them out, right? So, but they couldn't go in there. The paramedics and EMTs couldn't go in there to get them. They had to haul them out first. All right. So I'm painting a true story picture of the very, very limited access to the Holy of Holies. Now, Jesus, when Jesus died on Good Friday, what happened to the temple curtain?
ripped it in half.
Say again, Dave.
Was ripped in half.
It was ripped in half, and somebody else, just for the fun of it, because Dave might know the answer to this, but I like to spread the class around. What was significant about this ripping?
Kind of like a rip into different time periods in a way, like before Christ and after Christ.
Ooh, oh, I like this very much. Ooh, I like this answer. That's fantastic. Oh yeah, you can roll with this. You can write a thesis on this. But there was in the gospel when it says, and when Jesus died, the curtain in the temple was split in two. And what came after that description? What was really crazy about this?
Is this when the temple fell?
Didn't fall.
Oh.
Okay. Any other guesses? You can guess if you want. All right. So the
People were risen from the dead.
Oh yes, they were. People came out of the tombs. Okay, but the curtain in the temple was rent in two from top to bottom. That's what was cool about it. All right. So it wasn't like somebody came in there and said, "All right," whoosh, and just kind of partitioned it. This magical, mysterious thing happened where the thing split from top to bottom. One time, I can never do it again. As long as I live, I can never duplicate it on an Easter Sunday morning. I still can't believe we did it. At St. Peter's, it wasn't as high as this. Those timbers weren't as high. They're pretty darn high. They're about as high as where those pipes are from the pipe organ going across. Well, Georgianne Lee, who is a seamstress, helped me to find some super thin material. I can't believe it, but we created a curtain and we thumbtacked it to the beam going all the way across. So when the people came into church on Easter Sunday morning, there was a white curtain right across the altar rail all the way across. And I had prefabricated little slits in the curtain that you couldn't see. And I tied a string that went up and over through the top hole so that at the right time I could pull the string and the curtain rent in two from top to bottom. And then we pulled those two sides over like they were just huge curtains, because they were, and we tied them on either side so there was this glorious curtain. Imagine that, just kind of draped down over the altar rail. And then for the second service, I had to replace the centerpiece and do the whole thing again. Like, we did this twice, and we actually practiced it to make sure it worked, because I realized that when I pulled the first time, it didn't rend completely like down the middle, so I had to put little tiny slits. It was amazing, right? So, but I'm selling the visual, right? So the point on Easter Day was to say that the way into the Holy of Holies was now wide open. See, so that's a long time for me to make a simple point, but hopefully you'll just never forget it, because I've created a picture. So Christ's sacrifice, part of the significance of Jesus' sacrifice is that there is no more a Holy of Holies where only an elected person can come in. Jesus' sacrifice allowed the sins of the world to be forgiven, but also for full access of all of humanity to himself and to the holiest place. Make sense? Just nod if you're excited about that. All right. So then, what I want you to then see is that this rail here does not mean this is too holy for y'all. That everything I've said so far is to simply indicate that this is not to say you are not welcome up here. I am making the point in all of this that this is simply architecture. This is simply a way for you to come and kneel at the presence of the altar. And all of this means is that we can get 3 more people in here. That's all this rail means. It doesn't mean we're keeping anybody out. So that's why it should always remain open, and that's why you can take the smallest child or the oldest person in the church, and you can just walk right in here. So I'm guessing that many of you have not physically walked in here. So the next time you get a chance, I want you to just like boldly just walk into the sanctuary and just say, hey, curtain in the temple's rent, man. I'm going in. Like I'm diving in, right? So that we get this sense that we are all welcomed into this holy of holy spaces. Now, is this space more holy than the rest of the church? Well, in a sense, you could argue that it is. I feel like it is. I have come in here by myself and just sat in this sanctuary and prayed, and you can too when it's an appropriate time. This is where we consecrate the Eucharist, right? When Kendall Higgs was maybe about 12, little bitty girl, friend of my daughter's, member of the church, she was a gymnast. When we come here and we offer when we hold up the plates, right? All things come of thee, O Lord, and of thine own have we given thee. Or we sing the doxology. I picked up Kendall and just held her up here like this to illustrate that we all are being anointed, so that when the plate is passed around, my money is just a symbol. When I throw my money in the plate, this is a small s sacrament. Don't get carried away with my use of sacrament, but I mean it. It's an outward and visible sign of something, and that is that, God, you own all of my resources. You own 100% of everything that I have in the bank, all my physical resources. So I'm going to toss some of this into this gold plate as a sacrament or an outward sign that you are the owner of all I have. That's what the offering's about. So then those offerings get all collected. And so imagine that instead of throwing in my check or my money, I got in the plate. So what we're doing is we're all jumping in the plate as the plate's going around. And then what happens to the plate? It comes into the Holy of Holies. And then the priest offers it up. So the priest is offering up all the people. Isn't that cool?
How big was this girl you lifted up?
She's pretty small, but I could hold her. She went like pike position, but it was a visual nobody ever forgot.
No kidding.
And, so it was, and remember what we used to say, and I love the old liturgy as much as the new liturgy, but we used to say, and we present Romans chapter 12, present yourselves as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God, which is our spiritual worship. We used to say that right before the offering, right? So it's the same message, right? So when the offering comes forward, we offer ourselves. Plus, check this out, in the Eucharistic prayer this morning, I said, fine. Oh, wow, that's like her deep. Hold on a minute. All right. We offered the gifts, and then I said, sanctify them by your Holy Spirit to be for your people the body and blood of your Son, the holy food and drink of new and unending life in him. And then what do I say? Sanctify us also. Isn't that cool? So everything on the altar is getting sanctified, including us. Sanctify us also. And that's why I make the sign of the cross. Right? I don't make it for just because it's theatrical. I made the sign of the cross to bless this ordinary wine and ordinary bread that is no longer ordinary wine, ordinary bread anymore. It is now blessed wine, blessed bread, which represents the body and blood of Christ. And now I'm not an ordinary person anymore. Why? Because my parents took me into St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Plainfield, Connecticut, and had me baptized. And from then on, I've been sealed by the Holy Spirit in baptism and marked as Christ's own forever. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to retrace my baptism, and I'm going to ask God to remind me that I am not normal human flesh anymore, and just like disposable human flesh anymore. Sanctify us also, that we may receive this holy sacrament and serve you in unity, constancy, at peace, and at the last day bring us with all your saints into the joy of your eternal kingdom. Holy smokes, that's everything. I'm being anointed today now for God's service, and kingdom come. I'm good to go. So all of that is happening right here at the Eucharist. All right, we're good on time. Everybody good? All right. So it doesn't matter if you don't know the terms for all of these things, but the significance of the altar is important. Covering the altar is a fair linen, F-A-I-R linen. These things are very difficult to launder and very difficult to iron. The altar guilds usually have some kind of a special rack system so they can iron them. The worst fear of a priest is that you would spill wine on the fair linen. Don't ever want to do that, especially if you're visiting some church somewhere, because you probably won't get invited back, right? So you don't want to, because this thing is super tough to launder. I think of my mom. I think of my mother in doing the altar guild stuff in the church. God bless her soul. She went to be with the Lord in 2005. I always think of my mom when I'm doing anything around the altar. On top of the fair linen, we have the set chalice. I'm just going to set that to the side. We have the corporal. So this trifold large cloth is called corporal. The corporal has folds in it that fold in like this in a trifold always. That's how the altar guild irons it. So that it creates a little satchel, so that if I had a bunch of crumbs on here of the blessed bread, the consecrated bread, which represents the body of Christ, not normal anymore. It's not ordinary bread anymore, so I can't just toss it away. So what I can do is I can just wrap it up like this. Let's say I had a whole bunch in here. I can go outside. I can go out to the bushes, and I can just into the bushes, and we'll just bless all the birds. And they can come and eat up all that bread. That's perfectly fine, right? What I don't want to do is I don't want to throw it away. I don't want to mingle it with garbage, because it's holy, it's blessed, it's set apart. Holy means set apart. Sanctified means set apart. So I love to take, when I'm having a baptism, I love to take the rest of the baptismal water, and there are usually little kids there. We carry it outside, and we pour it on all the flowers outside of the church. Those little kids are out there carrying that big bowl out there, just blessing all the flowers outside the church. What we're not going to do, we can do anything we want with it outside. We just can't pour it down the drain, because then we're going to mix that holy water in with all the rest of the stuff in the drain. We wouldn't want to do that. It doesn't make any sense to a child, right? It makes perfect sense to a child that you would go outside and pour that water on living plants. We just bless the churchyard, right?
Same with the wine?
Yep.
Same with the wine?
Same with the wine. Exactly. So I'll bet you back here, because St. Peter's was built in 1911, there was a piscina And I'm sure it's Piscina, but I'm not 100% sure. It could be PIC, but I think it's called piscina. So a piscina is 100 years ago was a special basin built into the sacristy that went straight out into the ground. So it didn't go into the sewer system. So usually the ladies, sorry guys, I mean you can join the altar guild now, but back then it would have been generally ladies. They could go back and take that chalice that maybe had leftover wine in it, simply pour it down the piscina. They could take the baptismal water, pour it down the piscina, and it would go right out into the ground and not be mingled with. It's a cool architectural thing to watch for, to see where's the piscina, and it's just cool. And you can watch for it. You can go in the sacristy and look for the piscina. Okay. So now, hope they didn't put anything in there because I jostled it around too much. All right. On top is the burse, B-U-R-S-E. I can't tell you the derivation of where burse came from, but the way you remember it is purse, P-U-R-S-E. Go ahead.
So the girls wanted to know, I guess we don't have one of those, so what do they do with the wine?
Oh, I'm not certain they don't have one. But
I don't think we have a piscina, if that's what you mean.
yeah, I'm not sure. They might go outside, pour it on the ground.
That's what we did.
Yeah, so that's absolutely acceptable. And generally, you remember when I was a child, the priest always consumed everything that was in the chalice and then did the ablutions, the washings, not oblation, ablution, A-B-L-U. So, but it's a little bit impractical and people get a little impatient with it in 2020 because it involves going and getting more water from the acolytes, pouring the water in, swizzling it around, drinking it one more time, then taking the purificator, wiping out the inside. I have vivid memories of that happening. I can do it pretty quickly, but also I don't think it sends a terrific message to young people to have the priest just like chugging the wine, because kids put it together. They're like, wait a minute, there was a lot of wine left in there, right? I don't want to be in that position, so I don't do that. So I set it for the altar guild and let them pour it outside. Okay, I'm not saying that, I'm not critiquing another priest who does consume the rest of the wine. It's just, that's my preference. I'm just giving you my preference. All right, so burse, the reason why think of purse, and it always opens toward the priest, which is really cool. It's got a hinge on the outside. And in this burse, we have purificators, mini corporals. And these are the things that we use to wipe the outside and the inside of the chalice. Always have purificators. And then we have a veil. And then we have a pall, P-A-L-L. It's stiff. So you can think of pallbearers carrying a stiff, or carrying, sorry, that's how I always remembered it. Okay? So pallbearers carry a stiff. All right, so that's a pall. And then you have a paten, P-A-T-T-E-N, is the plate. The chalice. The chalice has a purificator on it. So it always goes corporal, chalice, purificator, paten with a host. A large piece of bread is called a host. Paul. And you have to practice this based on your church, because it falls really nicely. You have to practice it. You sort of drop it onto the altar and then swing it back like this, and then it makes a nice little heel in the center. Now, in my tradition, it was perfectly fine to reset everything just the way I found it, and I would just end the church service that way. Other folks have been trained that, okay, the Eucharist is over, so they'll pick up this whole thing, pick it up, and now we put it behind on the original altar. Other churches would put it over on the credence table, which is this guy, credence table. Credence table, well, I was always taught the wine is on the right, water's on the left. And I would always have the handles facing back, so the acolyte picks it up, comes straight over, and then offers it to the priest. When I was a kid, we didn't have more people than one chalice, so I'd always go right hand first. The priest would take, cruet, C-R-U-E-T, and pour the wine into the chalice. While the priest did that, I'd switch the water to my right hand, receive the wine back in my left, and offer the priest with my right hand the water. The priest would bless the water, take the water, add a little tiny bit of water to the chalice.
What's the meaning of that?
Why would we add water to the chalice?
Yes.
Why?
Does it have to do with Jesus' side being pierced?
Right. When they pierced Jesus' side, a mixture of water and blood flowed from his side. So then the priest would take the wine, I'd switch with the water, I'd switch the wine back to my original right hand, and then receive the water back, and I'm back to right where I started. And then I'd come over.
Is that a corporal?
This is a corporal, but it could just be a credence cloth. It could be on the credence table, a credence cloth. And then you would have a lavabo bowl, L-A-V-A-B-O, lavabo. Lavar is Latin, lavar in Espanol is to wash, right? So its Latin derivation is washing. So the lavabo bowl, and then a lavabo towel is going to look very much like a purificator. And the lavabo towel goes over the same arm as the bowl, so then the acolyte can take the water and then pour it over the priest's hands. And then the priest takes the towel and wipes his or her hands. To introduce you a little bit to my theology, or how I've done little maybe crazy things that people don't expect. What I did with my acolytes and what I did with my command chaplain on the ship, who was a newly ordained Episcopal priest, is when I'm celebrating and somebody washes my hands, instead of putting the towel back, I put the towel on my wrist now. I take the bowl from them, I take the water from them, and I wash their hands. So the significance is like a little bit of foot washing, Maundy Thursday foot washing, interchange between priest and some punk kid who was forced by his or her parents to be an acolyte, in order to get a really good brunch, at Olive Garden after church or something like that. This kid was completely bribed into this whole thing, was just trying to be polite. Well, all of a sudden you turn the tables. And there's something significant, really significant, that happens in that exchange. And all of a sudden, that kid's paying attention. Like, really.
Did you come up with that?
Sir?
Did you come up with that yourself, or have other people done it?
I've never seen it before. But in Sheridan, it was just like the acolytes, like, yeah, that's what happens. They just expect it because it happened all the time. And I think my associate probably carried on that custom. Again, my command chaplain, he was a commander. I was a lieutenant commander on my last deployment. He was American Baptist tradition, and then he was ordained. I got to be at his ordination. He loved it. We would always have this, there was this mutuality going on in this thing, and it's like a foot washing, but it's a hand washing. So there's significant little things that go on in this respectful. The other thing that happens is this bowing. So in the old church, 1928 prayer book, you know, when things were like super formal, you know, when the cool thing was when the priest would finish taking the bread and the wine, the priest would bow to the acolyte, like, thank you. And then the acolyte would bow back. That's that little exchange that was going on there. That mutual respect between the priest and the acolyte. I just don't want you to miss that, because that's ministry. That's like calling up this young person into a role of ministry. It's very, very significant. So when I was a kid, when I was a kid, you couldn't act in this role as the acolyte. You could be a torchbearer, you could be a crucifer, you couldn't be the server. It's a really big deal, right? You couldn't serve the priest until you were receiving communion yourself, and you couldn't receive communion until you were confirmed. So the cool thing is, Borcher, bishop was named Borcher or something like that, Porcher. I got to serve the bishop at my own confirmation, which was significant in my little brain, because I wanted to be a server before I was confirmed, like, whoa, right? So my mom was ironing upstairs in the house, and I was like, Mom, I want to be a server. She's like, okay. So she just like took authority, and she opened the prayer book to the creed. I believe in God the Father, and she said, read that. Tell me what's significant about that. What's the most important thing in the creed? And we just had this conversation about the creed and about faith in Christ and his death and what it meant for us and his sacrifice for us. And she's like, okay, like, you're checked out. Like, I passed my mom's theological test, and she probably had authority with the priest. She's like, hey, let him in. So I was like, okay, all of a sudden I was a server, because my mom brought me to that sort of recognition of my theological foundation. It was really cool. I mean, I'll never forget it, and I really credit her for kind of drawing that out of me. So here's this whole interaction. So now, as I look, we're at 5:39, as we turn the camera now and look at old school Christ in St. Luke's. My wife is pinging in. Old school Christ in St. Luke's, this was the altar. You're looking at the altar. The really cool thing is, let me come back here. You see the posts on this altar, the posts on that altar. They look really similar, don't they? But you know, ladies, Lauren and Leslie, you know that those are wood and those are stone. Isn't that cool? But the average person who walks into church would think it was all stone. They did a tremendous job building this altar that sets apart so that you got wood there and stone here. Pretty cool, huh? I mean, that's just one of the things you got to know about Christ in St. Luke's.
And Alex Grice, I'm not sure anybody else here knows him. Alex Grice and Mrs. Grice were fixtures in the church. He's the one that built that wooden altar. When did the change take place? Around Vatican II?
No, much later. Vatican II is like 62, 63. Vatican II is a Roman Catholic council that really lightened up Catholicism. In our case, it was 1979 Book of Common Prayer. That's the major turning point. From the 1928 Book of Common Prayer to the 1979 Book of Common Prayer, which we use now. So in the 28 prayer book, the priest was always had his, it was his, sorry, but his back to the congregation because essentially the priest is representing the congregation, which is not a bad idea. And so that whole, you know how we elevate and they ring the bell, right? When you elevate the host and the wine, well, the elevation makes a lot more sense here, doesn't it? Because you can't see it unless I elevate it. And then you can see it as I hold it up to the congregation. And this is solid. Like this will hold Kendall Higgs right here. Very easy. You know, hold the whole church. This is really solid. And so then they beautifully built this. So now our interaction with the congregation, just in our current mode of more pastoral theology than it's Eucharistic theology and pastoral theology. We definitely want to communicate with the congregation. And now, I mean, you'll see me, I'll get lost in the liturgy because I'm so concentrated on the people in the congregation. And can I help you? I don't think there is a Taizé service tonight. Is there? Does anybody know?
It's the third Sunday.
Okay, hold on just a minute. Hang on just a minute and I'll tell you. I'm conducting a class right now, so it's, no, relax, you're fine. Let me look.
A contemporary service or contemplative prayer or centering prayer, sorry, all over the place.
Yeah, the centering happened at
4. Yeah.
It's not on the calendar, Dave.
Okay,
No Taizé today.
okay,
It's not on the calendar.
okay, thank you. Yeah, there is no service this evening. Okay, thank you so much. And would you do me a favor, when you slip out, will you pull those doors real tight behind you? And please come back. If you'll come to go to christinstluke's.org, you can sign up, and we have a very COVID, careful deal right now, but please come back. We'd love to have you. Okay. All right, friends.
Nice improvisation, Dave.
All right. I've got to get back in the class. I was really surprising to see somebody walk in.
Those doors that get unlocked all the time, they don't get locked properly.
Okay, so then the juxtaposition now, what's more important to me now is to hold the host and to look at the congregation and especially, those new members who are like, oh, this is kind of cool, and they're not looking down, they're looking up because this is all very interesting, and we're looking at them and saying, this is my body, that this is, the Eucharist is a reenactment of the original Lord's Supper where I play the part of Jesus and y'all play the part of the disciples. But the thing is that anamnesis, when Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me, the Greek word anamnesis is more than just like, hey, when y'all get to 2020, would you kind of like remember me? It's not like that. It's when y'all get to 2020 and you do this again in 2020, picture yourselves right here at this table. So we're not re-sacrificing Jesus, which you're going to hear, you would hear if you, in some Catholic Eucharistic doctrine, we don't have a whole bunch of chapels out here where we got a whole bunch of priests sacrificing a whole bunch of Jesuses so we can get a whole bunch of spiritual benefit from re-sacrificing Jesus. We're not doing that. What we're doing is we are in an anamnesis moment of replaying the original Eucharist and welcoming all of these people to be the disciples. but not just like remembering that it happened 2020 years ago, but right now they get to be welcomed into this esteemed group of dudes. But it's not just dudes, right, anymore, right? So does that make sense, right? So now that's what's important to me, is that in this Eucharist, the brand new visitor, like you are right here, and this is my body, Jesus says, this is my blood, and they're like, cool, man, like, whoa, I grew up in a evangelical church somewhere, and they passed out little cups and stuff, but this is like cool. And then they come forward and they're like, automatically they sort of have this sense of reverence, like, whoa, and then they find themselves meeting Jesus there, right? And it happens in this holy dialogue. It's happening, right? So those are the things that are important to me. I'll stop right there and ask for questions. Or
Side note, as a charismatic evangelical entering the Episcopal Church, that is exactly what it's like.
Huh.
That is the reverence. You nailed it. It's something that I've only found in the Episcopal Church, and why I'm choosing to go into the Episcopal Church. Yeah, that's all I had to say.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you.
I remember the first time for me when I was in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I was a new officer and was going through some real hard times, and found myself at the Episcopal Church there as well. And that experience that you just described, Father David, is exactly what meant the most to me when I realized that I was really there and that with Jesus, and that he was really giving it to me, which was just wonderful.
Was that St. Mark's or St. Christopher's?
I think it was St. Mark's.
Right.
I hadn't thought about that for years.
First church in Wyoming. Yeah.
So I have a question.
Yes.
We're, of course, we were acolytes. So have they gotten more lax on, like, because I've been a server before, and of course I've taken this class, so I haven't been confirmed. So have they gotten like more lax about that?
About which part, Lauren?
Like, so you said that normally, like, you have to be confirmed in order to be the server. Have they gotten more like relaxed or something?
Yes, and I think that requirement was just kind of a certain formality at that time when I was a kid. I personally would bring that brand new visitor up, and if they wanted me to, I'd have them serve on their first Sunday. Because of that whole sanctuary concept, I don't want to place divisions behind people. But part of it came from, I'll speak highly of my parents, or my mom and my stepfather. Let me honor them for a minute. Part of that sense of holiness or rules or those things was the biblical notion that you don't want to receive the Eucharist in an unreverential manner or not recognizing Christ in the Eucharist. So it starts from a very genuine and pure idea, but then we set up rules. And you can see how me, as a truly punk kid with long, greasy, stringy hair, that experience with my mom was really a drawing to faith. But I'll also tell you that I saw this girl named Katie. Katie's got to be like 30 years old now, developmentally disabled, mentally disabled young lady. And Katie used to come to church, so this was 15 years ago when she was probably 12 or 13 years old. She'd hit the door and she was my bud. Like her parents did not have control of that girl anymore when she hit the door. And she would she'd be carrying the cross, carrying the torches, helping out, and lighting the candles before church, putting the candles out after the church. But Katie, she remembers that today, like that reverential sense of being included with all the gold and silver and
Well, yeah, because when we started doing acolyte, I was like, "Ooh, I'm the cool person now. Like, I get to do all these fancy things, and then I spilt water on Mother Sue's shoes, and then I was like, oh, I'm gonna go carry the torch now. So
That's awesome.
I mean, like when you be crucified for the first time, you're like, oh, like I'm in the big league now. Like I'm carrying the cross. Like, so I know Monica. She was really excited. She was in our acolyte group for a while, and she was like, I just want to do it. So she did hand sanitizer for a while. She was like a little hand sanitizer just so she could be a part of it. So I think a lot of people find it really.
I think Monica just wanted to be behind the altar with everybody else because her friends were too. So that was the first time that we were like, okay, well, what can we have her do? So she ended up coming up with us, and she would give out hand sanitizer, and we would find little jobs for her to do that way she could be a part of being behind the altar before she could be. She wasn't big enough to carry the torches or anything, but yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think we can swing right back to where we started with the architecture of the church and this sense that if we're not careful, we could see that it gets more prohibitive as we come forward. But as we are now, as you all give tours of the church post-COVID, you have them running the place again, and you end up bringing a friend, into the church, you're probably not going to stop at the altar rail, Now, and it just takes 10 seconds to say, no, you're welcome in here. You can come in here. And then there's this sense of like, woo, but that's just sharing the holiness of God with people. It doesn't mean that the church has become more secular. It means that more are included into the center of the holiness of God. And that can be conveyed quite quickly. It took me a lot of words to explain that, but it can be conveyed just in a gesture of welcome. So.
I've heard another reason for the altar rail, that it went to medieval times when they needed to keep the animals out.
That's cool. Yeah, it's awesome. Awesome.
Now, were you when your mom went through the prayer book, you make it sound like she got you confirmed enough to be able to do it. She
was convinced that I knew what the heart of the meaning of Jesus' sacrifice in the Eucharist was, and that I could say it in my own language. And then she just said to the priest, like, Zen. And
so the priest not following the protocols properly with you since you weren't formally confirmed?
Again, it wasn't probably written in the prayer book. It was
okay.
Probably a custom of the Connecticut church or the local church at that time.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sure it was a local custom. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah. So since we're on this topic of the Eucharist and stuff, I visited, a Catholic church. I visited an Orthodox church, both which on paper looked very well, but until I entered a service, I was like, I can't do this. The Orthodox church is far too long for me. But the main reason being the whole idea of you having to be confirmed either Catholic or Orthodox to partake of the Eucharist. And I've noticed in the Episcopal Church, that's not a thing. So I was just wondering, like, with this being kind of the middle way of Catholicism, Protestant, like all these things combined, how did this land of being that all are welcome to the table, which I think theologically is correct, but.
They just, I think, in the current catechism, it's probably clear in the catechism and in the rubrics that baptism is the entry rite, R-I-T-E, not T-H-T, entry rite to the Eucharist.
Yes.
Come to the Eucharist through baptism, which is cool. Now, go ahead and ask me, Have you ever given Eucharist to anybody who was not baptized? Yes. When at my brother's, most notably, I'm sure I've done it many times because I don't ask visitors who come forward, are you baptized? I don't ask them. It's a statement of faith. They're coming forward. They have their hands held out. We'll educate them later. You know, it's, I mean, really, I said to the people of Wyoming, don't be stingy with the sacraments. We should be baptizing people all the time. And then we can educate them later. Read the book of Acts. You know, we should be dynamic church. If somebody says they want to be baptized, like the Ethiopian eunuch, you know, he's like, there's water. Why should I not be baptized? And Philip says, well, I can't come up with a reason why you shouldn't. So they got down off the chariot and baptized the Ethiopian. And I'm sure he got educated later, right? So again, let's not be stingy with the gifts of God. So if we know we're in conversation with people and we're at Stella's and we're talking about membership, I can sort of talk about baptism being an entry to the Eucharist, and the person's like, oh no, I had communion, you know, the last 5 Sundays. No, that's all right. Let's get the horse in front of the cart now. No, it's just pastoral. And at my brother's fiance, her family is Muslim. And they, at my brother's funeral, they came to the altar rail and they held their hands out. And you betcha. I shared Christ with them, you know, and that was very significant.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So,
As a
yeah,
exclusivist, I love to hear stories about that.
yeah. We can put the horse in front of the cart later. We can get it. No, but yeah. So, yeah, entry right though, perfectly appropriate. But you'll notice that this church doesn't warn people away from the altar.
Yeah, I love that.
Reasons. I'll tell you, I'll speak for her because she would speak for herself if she were here. But after I left St. Peter's in Sheridan and my wife would come in, the clergy who followed, they had a prohibiting statement. It essentially said, hey, we're really glad you all came here, and if you're baptized, you can come and receive communion. You know, and nobody ever heard a statement like that from me, and you don't hear that statement here. You will hear it in some churches. And of course, the Roman Catholic brethren, they have to do it. It's mandatory for them to say, don't come and receive communion unless you're Roman Catholic. But some Episcopal churches will have that, and if you are baptized, you're welcome for communion. Saying to people, if you're not baptized, you're not welcome. We might not even get them back. That would be my point. Like, let's welcome people into the Holy of Holies first, and then explain to them later what it all means, and let's get it all sorted out in confirmation class. Because I'm not gonna, you know, I'm not gonna be. I mean, I'm not going to be excluded from heaven based on the fact that, you know, I'm sorry that I gave Eucharist to somebody who wasn't baptized. You know, I would much rather have that person welcomed into the Holy of Holies, and then we'll sort it out later. So again, Wynn can come next week and he can correct all this. So
I got something wonderful to share. I've been involved with the Catholic Worker for years, and in years past, they used to have the priest come by and celebrate, before a meal. And the priest, it was really very much don't ask, don't tell. The priest those priests couldn't care less about whether you were Catholic or not, because they had the idea of Vatican II, which, you know, was much more opening. And there are times when I've been in a Catholic church recently, and a couple times I've ignored the priest making that perfunctory statement and thought, I have my conscience to answer for here, and I'm a member of the body of Christ and I've taken communion. It's kind of funny. Sometimes I want, though, because I feel like I should be respectful. It kind of depends on where my spirit is, but there's a lot of don't ask, don't tell in the Catholic Church about that.
yeah, it's a good point, Curtis. I appreciate that. I'll share with you what I generally do. And I did this in Sheridan, Wyoming. And when I walked in the door, everybody knew exactly who I was. If I were there for a funeral, or I were maybe reading or sharing something, And so I would stand in line to come up for communion. And of course, all these local Roman Catholics, they knew exactly who I was. But when I got to the front, and you can do this in any Catholic service, just cross yourself, just like you would at our altar rail. Just walk up, cross yourself, receive the blessing of the priest, and then come back. And you think of all these folks in Sheridan, Wyoming going like, oh, cool, like that was really neat, right? That these two priests had this little, almost like the washing of the hands moment. So that's another thing you can do to participate, but also respect their boundaries. And I did it with the priests on my ship a couple of times. I just said, I just walk up, and we don't even have to talk about it. I just bow my head and cross my arms and receive the blessing of the priest. Like, it's cool.
And when I've gone to Catholic Worker House Church, which continues, there's no priest, but we do use bread and wine, and we pass it around. And I think it's technically a love feast, since it's not doesn't have the office of a priest. But all those Catholics there absolutely aren't thinking this is not a real communion. So they know they're having communion, even though the priest isn't there, because their own personal theologies doesn't get hung up on the technicality, even though it technically is a love feast.
Yeah. And I'll say, thanks, Curtis. I'll say that I have participated in those kinds of ceremonies. My own personal choice is that once we are fully cognizant of the Eucharist and the place of the Eucharist in the fellowship, then I want to observe this as being the central part of the Eucharist. But yes, in agape meals, agape feasts, those are times that you'll see that in your experience as well. Anybody else before we close?
Yes, at the Taizé community in France, the Pope has given dispensation for anybody to receive communion. It doesn't matter if you're Catholic or not.
Wow, cool. Thank you.
But they had big trouble out at Church of the Holy Family around this whole thing, this whole issue. And they've even wondered about getting shut down. It's a fascinating story. Church of the Holy Apostles out in the beach. And they ended up having altars at different ends of the church when they did communion in the end, to honor this fact that the community, it's not a parish, is the joint community, is not still in communion. It gets really bizarre at times.
Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else before we close?
I can't wait to tell Wynn how he needs to watch your presentation today to see how it's done with visual aids that Wynn needs to pick up.
He'll probably watch this, so I knew that he was going to be able to come behind me and sweep the trail, so we'll welcome him to watch that. I will. We'll close in prayer. Thinking about this little story, which I think I'll leave off. It's been a privilege to spend some time with you tonight, and to think about the sanctuary, and really to think about, what Scott said as a person coming from another tradition, and what Dave talked about, coming into a church for refuge. So we can think about, today we had first-time visitors here. Even in the midst of this very restricted time, we had first-time visitors. So we can think about welcoming the community in and welcoming people to the Holy of Holies. So let's pray. Thank you for Scott and what he shared about his experience coming through the doors. Thanks for what Dave shared. Thanks for what each member has shared, and Curtis's expressions of communion, and Lauren and Leslie's reflection of their time as acolytes. Thank you for each person here tonight, and that this is a very special place for all of us, and that the most special places that we could design, this beautiful stone, wood, glass, are not prohibitive of anyone. So help us reach out into our community with open arms and a faith that stretches into the community. And let us come into your presence with thanksgiving and raise a loud shout to you with psalms. Bless us and keep us tonight as the sun goes down. Let us pray in the words Jesus taught us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. If you'd like to engage on any of this with me, you're welcome to drop an email or send a text or call or anything. The church has my information. I can give you my cell phone number right now. It's probably easier to give than my email address. My cell phone is 307-751-4297. I'll say it one more time, 307-751-4297. And I don't use social media because I would need like a staff person to run it, and I don't have a staff. So I have a couple of private email groups, one for sort of news of family and travel, and the other for devotionals. You're welcome to jump in on those if you would like to stay in touch. That's kind of my way of staying in touch with people. And it's a blessing to be here with you. So thank you so much for having me tonight. God bless you all.
Fantastic.
Well, have a good night. Okay.
Thanks, Father.
God bless. Bye.